Hey, friends. So, this is the sermon I recorded for the week of August 23rd. Um, so, I'm just recording and posting it here. If you didn't catch it this morning, at in-person worship, or if we're in the middle of our series, This Is Our Story. It's a rather a long series. So if you just wanted to get caught up, to make sure you know where we are, every sermon from this series is on our channel. So if you wanted to get caught up and just catch the sermon, here it is. So let me get started by reading our focus scripture passage. It might be a familiar story, but that's what the series is all about: exploring the foundational stories of our faith, to re-encounter them, to hear again the grand story of the people of God, and to find our own story in the midst of that larger story. So first, let's hear our story for today. This is a significant episode in the larger story. It's the beginning of the book of Exodus, the beginning of the story of Moses and the liberation of the Israelites. So, hear these words: Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 8. Now a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. And he said to his people, rather I should say the Pharaoh said to his people, "The Israelite people are now larger in number and stronger than we are. Come on, let's be smart and deal with them. Otherwise, they will only grow in number. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land." As a result, the Egyptians put 4 men of forced work gangs over the Israelites to harass them with hard work. They had to build storage cities named Pithom and Ramesses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they grew and spread, so much so that the Egyptians started to look at the Israelites with disgust and dread. So the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. They made their lives miserable with hard labor, making mortar and bricks, doing field work, and by forcing them to do all kinds of other cruel work. The king of Egypt spoke to 2 Hebrew midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. "When you are helping the Hebrew women give birth and you see the baby being born, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, you can let her live." Now the 2 midwives respected God, so they didn't obey the Egyptian king's order. Instead, they let the baby boys live. So the king of Egypt called the 2 midwives and said to them, "Why are you doing this? Why are you letting the baby boys live?" And the 2 midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're much stronger and give birth before any midwives can get to them." So God treated the midwives well, and the people kept on multiplying and became very strong. And because the midwives respected God, God gave them households of their own. Then Pharaoh gave an order to all his people: "Throw every baby boy born to the Hebrews into the Nile River, but you can let all the girls live." Now a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket, sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the baskets among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, while her women servants walked along beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." Then the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed. "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for your work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, I pulled him out of the water. Word of God for the people of God. We said, thanks be to God. Fear. That's what the episode that's before us today is all about. Fear. Now, we have a unique relationship with fear right now because we are in the midst of a global pandemic, an economic recession, an unemployment crisis, the school year is beginning, and we're getting into the final couple months of a presidential campaign. We have an intimate knowledge of fear and anxiety right now. We know what that feels like. Now, to name at the top here, fear itself, fear is neutral. Not good or bad, it's just a natural bodily reaction to external stimuli. It's been developed over millions and millions of years of evolution, developed from the basic fight or flight response that tells us you are in danger. You are in danger. There is a threat endangering you. So fear is neutral. It's just there. We got it, and it does some good things for it. But also, fear also has a way of working itself into places where it's not helpful at all. I think we all have stories about this. Myself, as a music major in college, we had recital hour every Monday at noon, where every music student had to perform at least one solo per semester in front of the entire music department in that recital hour. That was just the time set aside. One time every semester you had to get up on that stage at recital hour in front of all of your peers and professors and perform. So especially for me, especially in my own first 2 years, but also the rest, but especially those first 2 years, I would always get really anxious, really afraid, the stomach churning kind of fear before these performances. And I wasn't alone. A lot of other students felt that. But logically, thinking after the fact, why did I feel fear? Why did I do? My life was not in danger. I was performing in front of a friendly audience. All of the faculty wanted me to succeed. All of the students there were going to have to perform up on that stage. So either they had been in my place that semester, or they were looking ahead with trepidation for when they would have to be in the future up in my position up there on that stage for Monday recital hour. So fear was just, I couldn't really do anything about it. It was getting in the way, but the fear was still there. Even though it didn't really make logical sense, the fear was still there, and the fear made it real difficult to play well. So fear. As I share my thoughts here, I want you to reflect on this question. Fear. Reflect on this question. When has fear shown up in your story? When has fear shown up in your story? Because it's fear that motivates the beginning of this story in Exodus. When's fear shown up in your story? Keep reflecting on that, because fear motivates this story in Exodus. It's all over the place. This constant factor in this story. Here at the beginning, we read about this Pharaoh allowing fear to control the story. The Israelites, the ancient people of God, the original people of God, they are in Egypt, away from their homeland, Canaan, the promised land. They're in Egypt. They had been treated with favor, but now there's a new Pharaoh. Doesn't know who they are. All he knows is that he does not like these foreigners in his country. Now, by all accounts, the Egyptians had no logical reason to fear the Israelites. The Israelites had just immigrated to Egypt several decades ago as refugees to escape famine in Canaan. Egypt had food, Canaan did not have food, so they escaped as refugees to Egypt a few decades ago. And they married, they had families there. Their kids and their grandkids most likely knew nothing besides Egypt. Maybe the oldest people could remember pre-Egypt, but their kids, their grandkids, this was their home. They knew only Egypt. They learn the language, they pay the taxes, they contribute to society. They keep their own ethnic culture alive, but they are residents in Egypt now. This is their home. But for some reason, this new Pharaoh comes to power, and he stokes up this fear of the Israelites so that the whole country turns on them. He makes the Israelites in this scary other. Right? They are not one of us. They are not Egyptian. They speak a different language. They look different. They sound different. They dress different. They have different customs. I'm not sure about this circumcision thing. So these peaceful immigrant refugee people, they are now labeled dangerous. They are to be feared. That's Pharaoh's message. Be afraid of these people. And we see what happens when he does that. They're put into forced work gangs. Then they are enslaved. Then their firstborn sons are ordered to be killed. So I've been thinking how that happens. It's easy to read it as 1 second they're free, the next second they're in work gangs, the next second they're enslaved, the next second infanticide is ordered. Because that's just how the story is told. But I'm imagining it, whether or not this is accurate, I'm imagining it being a gradual thing, a gradual slope down. The Pharaoh starts projecting this message out there. He has a powerful, powerful voice. So gradually, the Israelites were denied respectable, higher paying jobs because no one wanted to hire one of those dirty Israelites. So they're only given the lowly jobs like brickmakers, like field workers. Respectable, quote unquote, respectable Egyptians didn't want to do those things. So of course, the Israelites, their economic security plummets. Their neighborhoods are labeled slums. The Israelite people, they started getting desperate. So Pharaoh and the government, they continue to stoke fear of the Israelites. They're scary images of criminal Israelites. So we got to control them somehow. So of course, living conditions for the Israelite people worsen, and of course, they continue to get more and more desperate under what becomes slave labor. But they still multiply. And Pharaoh painted them as scary Israelites. They are going to take your country away from you, take your jobs, take your safety. So we got to take drastic steps. Kill all their newborn sons. You see, that's what happens when fear controls the story. It runs away from us. But the female characters in this story, they show us a different way. Shiphrah, Puah, Moses' mom Jochebed, his sister Miriam. For these women, certainly fear was a constant and a significant factor in their story, because fear is a constant factor in our story, a significant factor in their story, but it is not a controlling factor. They show us what that looks like. I love the inclusion of Shiphrah and Puah here. They are midwives, women without families. Normally, they would not be named. They would just disappear from history, but they've been preserved through millennia. Pharaoh goes up. He orders these two to betray their own people, kill the baby boys as they help the mothers give birth. But these two, they are so brave. They resist, they disobey these orders, and Pharaoh looks around, he still sees all these Hebrew baby boys running around, all these foreign kids. And he goes up, he asks them, why are these baby boys running around? And I love their answer, right? I love their answer. They say, Hebrew women are stronger than your Egyptian women. They don't need us. These Hebrew women, they don't need us to help them give birth like your frail Egyptian women do. So obviously, Pharaoh's plan isn't working. So Pharaoh orders all of Egypt to do this, because remember, the Israelite people are to be feared. If they keep having kids, they're going to overrun this country. They're going to take us over. All Egyptians, throw the Hebrew baby boys into the Nile River. Then it's into that context that Moses is born to Jochebed. And Jochebed keeps him. I cannot imagine the fear that she has for those 3 months. Her Egyptian neighbors have been ordered to kill this baby boy. But again, she doesn't let fear control her story or her baby's story. She keeps this baby. She keeps him until she can't keep him under wraps anymore. And she probably knows where Pharaoh's daughter comes out. I don't believe this was not a random placement on the Nile. Let's just see what happens if I put him in a basket on the Nile River. I have a feeling that she knew where Pharaoh's daughter comes out. And she was counting on Pharaoh's daughter to have pity on this little baby. So she sets the baby in a basket at the banks of the Nile where Pharaoh's daughter would see this basket. And she sends Miriam to watch. And we heard the rest. We know the rest. The baby's adopted into Pharaoh's household. He is named Moses. And the grand story of God's people continues because these women did not allow fear to control their story by the grace of God. And because of that, this baby Moses will eventually become the one through whom God liberates their people from slavery. Fear was a significant factor in this story, but not the controlling factor. It takes us back to that question that we've been reflecting on. When has fear shown up in your story? Whether or not it's controlled anything, when has fear shown up in your story? Because fear is always a significant factor in the story. It is a human experience. But it doesn't have to be a controlling factor. All of us are dealing with a unique kind of fear right now in the middle of a pandemic, right? We're afraid of contracting the virus ourselves. We are afraid of a family member or friend contracting the virus. We are afraid for ourselves or our loved one losing a job, their income, their stability. We're afraid for our community. We're afraid of the havoc that this is wreaking on the previously normal patterns of life. And we're afraid that nothing will get back to normal. And we've been feeling this since mid-March. Now, like I said at the top, fear is a neutral experience. We've developed it through evolution to protect us from legitimate threats. And that way it's good. But because fear is so ingrained within us, it's a natural thing that we can't control. It can be hard to keep our reaction to that fear from running amok. It's hard to differentiate between legitimate and illegitimate threats when that fear comes up. So during this time when fear is just in the air all over our community, we as followers of Jesus can provide a witness in this culture. Now, it's not a witness that we just shouldn't be afraid. It's a human experience. We cannot control whether or not we feel fear. It's not, don't be afraid. That's not the message. We can be a witness that fear does not have to control the story. We are just the latest generation in this grand story of God's people. Fear has been a significant and a constant factor in that story. But it hasn't been the controlling factor, at least not all the time. The church has a really sordid past of when fear has played a controlling factor in the story. But we are part of the people of God who, by the grace of God, have faced all kinds of fear and not let it control the story. Or at least God has moved it forward despite the ways that fear has controlled the story. So fear is a significant factor in our story, but it doesn't have to be a controlling factor. Our communities need that witness right now. So it gives us a calling today. This calls us to learn to regulate our fear so that we can play our part in this story. Because if fear controls us beyond the healthy safeguards, when there is a legitimate threat, then we can't do ourselves or anyone any good. And there are some specific practices that we can use to regulate our fear so that we can play our part in this grand story of the people of God. I got some of these from a good friend, Brandy Lust. Specific practices that can help us regulate our fear. Not to not feel fear. We can't control that, but to regulate our response to that fear. So I'm going to talk through the 4 of them, and then we are going to practice one of them right now. But talking through 4 of them first. First, if we want to regulate our fear, we can modify our media consumption. Because fear sells, doesn't it? Cable news knows this. Social media knows this. Any media outlet, news or otherwise, knows that if you see a headline that makes you afraid, you're going to click on that headline. You're going to keep reading. You are going to keep watching. If you feel afraid, you're going to keep on that. So ask yourself, what media are you consuming each day? Again, it could be news media. It could be any type of media. News, television, social media, etc. What type of media are you consuming each day? Is it all negative, all fear-inducing? And what might be the impact of that? And we can consider how we might balance the media we consume. Not that we have to shut out everything that doesn't make us feel good, because that would make us rather ill-informed citizens. But how we might balance the media we consume. Second, you can talk with your fear. You can have a conversation with your anxiety. I have a lot of difficulty connecting with my emotions. A lot of difficulty with it. I'm really working on it. And so it was a big deal when I discovered that I could actually do this. Talk to my fear. Have a conversation with these feelings. So how I do it. Notice when you're experiencing fear or anxiety. Notice when you're feeling that maybe your heart rate picks up, maybe your breathing becomes more shallow, maybe you start feeling just kind of more frantic and on edge. Notice when you're feeling that fear or anxiety. And then, again, what I do, imagine yourself just sitting in a car with that fear, with that anxiety, both of them in the car with you. And then have an internal conversation with them in the car. Maybe even speak this out loud if there's no one around. Have a conversation with them in that car. What I say, something along the lines of, thank you for showing up. I see fear and anxiety. I see what you're trying to do. I appreciate you trying to keep me safe, but you're not getting in the driver's seat. It's not get out. I don't tell them to get out of the car. I just say, you're not getting in the driver's seat. You can stay in the back seat, but I will be driving. I will be the one behind the wheel. I am controlling this car. Regulating fear, that has done so much for me. Talking to it like that. Sounds crazy, but boy, it works for me. Third, a simple practice. Just called the 4-7-8 breath. And it's real simple, but it is so good. Breathe in to the count of 4, then hold your breath to the count of 7, and then release it all the way out to the count of 8. In for 4, hold for 7, then out for 8. And if you do that for a couple minutes straight, speaking from experience, if you do that for a couple minutes straight, it just resets the nervous system back to baseline, calms down your heart, you get control of your breath, and it just gets us out of the knee-jerk reaction mode. When we're talking about fear and anxiety, that's when we're in the danger spot. And this practice gets us out of that. And finally, fourth practice, mindful movement. Another way to regulate our body's response to fear. There are a lot of ways to do this. But the simplest way, make tight fists with both your hands and then just stretch your hands out widely. Stretch your fingers out all the way. Squeeze your hands together, then stretch the fingers out. And you can do this with your breath to kind of align everything. Deep breath in while making tight fists. And then long breath out while stretching out your fingers. Rhythm, movement, and focused attention. It decreases our anxiety. Again, it gets us out of the knee-jerk reaction mode. Now, like I said, I'm going to lead us in one of these practices, just real simple, the mindful movement practice. Because I find this is a new one that I mean, it's not new, but it's a new practice to me. And it's been really helpful for me to regulate my fear and anxiety. So, we're going to settle into our seats so that we are relaxed but alert. And draw attention to your back and your shoulders. Draw your attention to your feet on the ground. Draw your attention to any tension that you're holding in your body. And now, just start to take some nice, slow, relaxing breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathing in peace, breathing out fear. Now, continue breathing like that. And take your hands, curl them into a fist and squeeze them together, holding them as tight as you can for 10 seconds. Now take 10 seconds to slowly release them and stretch out your fingers. We're going to do that again. Inhale and squeeze your fists together. And exhale and spread your fingers wide. I encourage you to pick one of those practices this week. Modify your media consumption, talk to your fear and anxiety, the 4-7-8 breath, or the mindful movement. Again, I'm recording this for August 23rd, so I'm going to remind you of these in the email update I send out tomorrow on August 24th, so be sure you're on our email list. But fear has shown up in all of our stories. Fear is a significant factor in all of our stories, but it doesn't have to be a controlling factor. We're called to learn how to regulate our fear so that we can play our part in the grand story of the people of God. God has given us grace to do this, but it is up to us to learn how to regulate. to pick up a practice that helps us do that so that we can witness to our neighborhoods and our families and our communities that fear does not have to control the story. I think that's all I have to say, at least for now. So, dear friends, grace and peace.